What's up, guys? Hope you guys have all been well and staying safe. Welcome back to another video. On the menu today, we've got the Longines Admiral 5-star review. This is a vintage piece, but just before we dive into the review, I just want to talk about my opinions on Longines as a brand and what they used to offer and what they offer these days. More specifically, why I think vintage Longines is more worth it than the modern day Longines, unless we're talking about something modern from Longines that is vintage inspired, if that makes sense. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't already, please leave me a like and subscribe down below. Join the watch movement, helps me out a ton and keeps you up to date on your watch content. Now, if you don't know anything about Longines as a brand, they have a very rich and long history. They're older than Omega, Patek Philippe. They're like 70 years older than Rolex. In present day, they're owned by the Swatch Group. Okay, so story time. So in about 2018, I was looking for something Longines. I just went to a boutique. I just wanted to see what they had to offer. I didn't really know much about the brand at the time. I didn't really know what I was looking for. All I know is that Longines was a brand that I had walked by in a shopping mall boutique once. And I was like, hey, you know what? I know they make automatic watches. I know they've been around for a while. I'm going to go check it out and see what they have to offer. I was pretty unimpressed when I showed up. I don't know if maybe at the time the selection maybe wasn't that great, or if Longines hadn't come out with some of the models that I appreciate more that they do offer today. But I remember trying on, at the time it was a Hydro Conquest, and it didn't leave me with a very good image of the brand. I thought the watch did a terrible job at being a dressy diver. I didn't like the fact that it had Arabic numerals. I think it just didn't blend well between sort of being more classy and also being a tough diver, at least not like some other divers do. Some other divers are really good at being sort of an all-purpose one watch collection type watch where you can wear them to, let's say, something in a business environment. You can also take them to the beach. I didn't find the Hydro Conquest did a very good job at either. I also found a little bit clunky, not very form-fitting, and a little bit too large for my taste. So all in all, I didn't start off with a very good impression of Longines. And on top of that, the other models they did offer that they had in stock at the boutique, those didn't do a very good job for Longines either. I don't remember what models they were, but they seemed pretty bland, basic, uninspiring, sort of your typical shopping mall watch brand that you would find, you know what I mean? And for not cheap prices either. I could have saved myself some money, I think, that day buying like a Nixon for like 70 bucks or whatever, versus spending $400, $500 on like Longines, which, to be honest, the ones they had anyway seemed very bland, very uninspiring, very basic. I just personally did not like what they had to offer that day. So I didn't really look back. I just kind of left. And then in my mind, Longines was just like sort of, I don't really care for them too much, and I started diving into other brands. Now, fast forward another year or two, I happened to stumble across a different Longines boutique, and now there were new models that had come out. Specifically, I remember picking up, I think it was a Heritage Conquest, I want to say, but I remember being very appreciative of the fact that the watch looked much more classically inspired. It seemed to offer a much better movement as well. It fit on my wrist much, much better. And the price tag wasn't ridiculous for what you were getting. It wasn't cheap, obviously, because it was still one of their non-budget watches. But I remember for the price, I think it was going for like $1,000 or something like that. It just seemed like the quality seemed to be matching, at least more or less so, with the price tag. Obviously, all prices in shopping malls are inflated, but for other watches that were available, it wasn't ridiculous, and it just sort of changed my perception of Longines. Like many other brands, Longines was clearly playing on the strategy of looking back into their history, finding inspiration from one of their older timepieces, and then creating sort of either a modern replica or a modern, we'll call it spiritual successor, with modern movement, modern technology in a tougher, sleeker, just more modern package, which this is no secret. Everybody's doing this today. Oris, Tudor, it doesn't matter. Everybody's doing this today, and it's not a thing to complain about, in my opinion. They're coming out with some very, very, very incredibly sexy watches that look like they came out 100 years ago, but definitely operate by today's standards. Me, as well as many other people, can say that we are very much appreciative of the fact that they are getting re-inspired by their rich, long, and diverse history in watchmaking, and that brings you to the watch that I have here today. This is the Longines Admiral 5-star automatic caliber 505, which ran from about the mid-60s to about the end of the 1970s-ish. The exact date where they discontinued this model, it's pretty hard to find information on it. I don't think this was a very popular watch. However, it is an old Longines. it is a vintage Longines, and so it's going to make it in the video. All right, so in a nutshell, we're looking at a modest 34.5 millimeter diameter, which was common for the time. It's only 11 millimeters thick, beating at 28,800 vibrations per hour. You've got a 30-hour power reserve before it dies, according to my own testing anyway. I can't actually find any official numbers online. There's actually very little information about this watch online in general, but according to my testing, it's 30 hours. It's also sitting in an 18 karat gold case, and it's got water and shock resistance as well, although I wouldn't get a vintage watch like wet ever, just because that's based on the gaskets and stuff from the time. They tend to dry out over time, especially if they haven't been serviced. But regardless, just with the testing standards and stuff that have improved throughout the years, I just think it's not as trustworthy to trust a water resist or a shock resist badge from a vintage watch. It definitely says vintage with patina on the hour markers and the scuffed up crystal. Speaking of the crystal, it's nicely domed. It adds a very nice warm hue to the silvery cool dial beneath it. So much so that in different lightings, the dial can go from a brighter white almost to a shimmering silver to even slightly yellow. So in like a basement setting with sort of a warmer tone light above you, you're going to see more of the gold tones come out in the watch, and then out in almost whitish light under the bright sun at midday, you're going to see a lot more of those whites and silvers pop out of the dial. And by the way, this kind of crystal is probably one of the main reasons you're going to want to buy vintage, in my opinion. You can check out my video on my top reasons to buy vintage if you're interested in the description below. As far as size, it definitely sits nice and snug on my 7.5-inch wrist, especially being so thin at 11 millimeters. There's always unjustified concern about vintage watches that they're too small or they don't wear well for modern times. My wrist isn't the biggest by any means, but I think it wears great, and I've always preferred something 38 millimeters and below for a dress watch anyway. I don't find there's any reason to go above that unless going into sports watch territory. Basically, this is the kind of watch that Longines has been re-inspired by in their new lineups, among many, many others. And they definitely have no shortage of watches to choose from throughout their history. Just by comparing this model to some of their newer models and lineups, you can see there's a clear direction they've decided to go. Even if this specific watch isn't exactly the inspiration for any particular model, it's more so the general aesthetic, size, and proportions that you can see is similar between this watch and something like their flagship Heritage, just as an example. And I very much agree with what they're doing. It's made Longines a much, much more desirable brand, and they've had to do nothing more than simply look back into their past and get re-inspired and make something new out of the inspiration. Which is why, in my opinion, if you're going to go for a Longines, either go for something vintage or go for something vintage aspired, which is going to make up basically most of their successful modern models. On that note, that was the video, guys. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Please leave a like and subscribe down below. It helps me out a ton, and I'll see you guys next time in the next episode. Until then, take care and stay safe.